Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning into today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, and I apologize that today I had to do this live streaming 2 hours later than the usual schedule, which is originally at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. But today, as you may know, guys, I live in Germany, and this is a personal story I would like to share with you. I had to, I asked for a copy for a document from a governmental office here in Germany, and they gave me an appointment 3 months later. So I asked for the appointment in December 2023, and they gave me the appointment on the 12th of March 2024. And the office was 1.5 hours away from my home. So you have to go 1.5 hours and come back 1.5 hours. And today there was a strike in Berlin for the public transport, especially the what they call the S-Bahn, the trains, the faster trains inside the city. So I spent most of the day, unfortunately, going and coming back. And we are still waiting for Germany to do what is called the digitalization of these processes. Hopefully, that would happen soon, because it's really time wasting to go all the way and wait all this time just for a piece of paper that you could do by just attaching the documents online and asking for the documents online, and the process can go smoothly. So tomorrow after tomorrow, it's going to be the usual. And on Wednesday, tomorrow, Nina Pisantina, she's going to join us. If you remember yesterday's live streaming, guys, about Estonia, I have made some controversial ideas and thoughts about the era of World War II. And the role of Estonia back then, and their collaboration with Nazi Germany, and their role in the siege of Leningrad, the 850 days of siege, which led to the killing of 1.5 million Soviet people or Russian people. There, some of them were of starvation. On Thursday, Dr. Jamal Wakim is coming to our show. He is a professor of international relations and history in the Lebanese University, and he is one of the people who educated me about the Ukraine war. So I look up to him, and I'm very excited about this guest. With Nina, she's more interested in history, so I'm going to ask her some of the questions and also some of the comments that you disagreed with me in my assessment of the Estonian case, and you posted comments negating or disagreeing with me in my analysis or in my observation of the situation back then. I'm going to ask her about these comments and ask her to respond, or ask her to give me her opinion. I think that's important, since she is also a historian. So, guys, most of the videos that I'm posting, these streams, live streamings on Syriana Analysis, it's between Monday to Friday. And every time I end the live streaming, maximum 2 minutes, 3 minutes later, YouTube says that we have limited the advertisements on this video, and we have to look into this video. And if you want, you can apply for an appeal, which means this process takes around 7 days, between 2 days to 7 days to look into the video. And between 2 days to 7 days, most of the views that I get of any new live stream is in the first 24 hours, right? Because then we have a new live streaming. So I'm losing around 90% of the viewership, the advertisement of the viewership, because of their decisions to limit the advertisements or demonetize the videos until they look into every single video. So only if you can, guys, only if you can, and if you're capable, please become a patron. Patron allows me to finance my work, the softwares, the hardwares, and also my living, and also gives me the privilege to stay independent and be able to present to you quality news and analysis, and spend time, hours per day, in order to prepare a live streaming. I'm not just coming to the live streaming and spending my time and wasting your time. I want to educate myself and share my education and my knowledge with you. Probably you would also like what I learned new, or probably you didn't also know about something that I learned today, right? So only if you can, please become a patron. The link is in the description below when this live streaming is over. And also hit the like button so that this video can navigate through the heavy and I would say hard algorithm of YouTube, especially with the suppression of speech against independent journalists like myself. So today's live streaming is going mostly to be about new documents revealed by the French military, and this was leaked to the press in the French press, and it was translated by one of the famous experts on China on Twitter, and I took some of the parts of this article and I made slides for you, so we also understand what the French government and the French military is thinking of behind closed doors. Because what they say in the press and what the politicians say in the press, and what the politicians, when the politicians make statements, these statements do not necessarily mean that this is their true conviction and their true opinions. So sometimes some of these confidential documents get leaked to the media, to the press, or somebody has an interest to leak it to the media because they have a disagreement with some politicians, because in every political system there are some disagreements, right? I mean, even in the American establishment, there are disagreements how to deal with Syria now, right? So some of them leak some of these confidential documents to the press so that they would scandalize the president or some of the decision makers there, that what they're doing in Syria is horrendous and they have to back off and they withdraw from Syria. Or the other way around, even if they have a leaked document, they don't leak it to the press so that they keep the policy intact. Now, when those war started in Syria, one of the ways that I learned how the French side thinks, the French government, especially under Sarkozy, because remember, France played an instrumental role in the regime change in Libya and the killing and murdering of the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. So when this happened, French felt like, yes, now I can muscle my powers and I can show them my muscles also in the Middle East. And France has France is the former colony in the Middle East, right, of Syria, of Lebanon, for example. So when they saw that the opportunity rose in Syria and the demonstrations started, whether manufactured or not, they jumped the wagon, especially backed by their previous victory in Libya, and they wanted to do another regime change, this time in Syria. So I wanted to learn what's the position of France. And one of the ways that I learned the position of France was a book called Les Chemins de Damas. This is a French book, Les Chemins de Damas. When this live streaming is over, I could post the link. It's in French. I suspect that most of you guys don't speak French. But anyways, I can post it in the comments if you, in the comments below when this live streaming is over. Please let me know now in the live chat if you speak French or if you're interested. So this book was based on the diplomatic cables and also the intelligence conversations and discussions between the foreign ministry of France and also the defense ministry and also the intelligence apparatuses there. So the intelligence community and the military community were speaking about Syria in their documents in the past few decades, up until the moment of what is called the Syrian revolution or the regime change war. So they took these documents, they studied it, they analyzed it, and they present to us how the French government or the successive French governments thought about Syria, and especially after 2005 when the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri happened, and they wanted to weaken the position of Syria in Lebanon and probably do a regime change war in Syria. But they knew that the so-called regime in Syria is very strong and it's not going to give up to their regime change tactics. So in this book, I also learned that the French intelligence was present in Syria in 2011 when the demonstrations started in order to study the situation on the ground and also report to their superiors in Paris and also warn them against the radicals in Syria. And they were very honest with their superiors, and they told them that the most of the demonstrators or the people who were leading the demonstrations were radicals in Syria, and they were not calling for democracy. They are mostly part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and also they reported to their superiors that the number of the people who were demonstrating against Assad were the minority and not the majority, as in the media there, because in the media they're trying to portray that all of Syria was rising against the president back then. So now we are in the 12th of March 2024. We have a new documents by the French military leaked to the press and published by the investigative journalist Laurent Valdiguier, I hope that I'm butchering his name probably. And the article is published in a French journal called Marianne. And the title of the article is War in Ukraine, From Caution to Panic, What Macron's Shift Hides. So I made slides out of this article, and it is translated to English. And I would like to share with you some of these slides because it's important for us to understand now, since France is speaking about sending troops to Ukraine, what do they think about the situation in Ukraine itself? So this is the investigative journalist, Laurent Valdiguier. He published in Marianne, and he's an investigative journalist. And as I mentioned, the title of the article is War in Ukraine, From Caution to Panic, What Macron's Shift Hides. So, Ukraine's counteroffensive gradually bogged down in mud and blood and didn't result in any strategic gain. And its planning, conceived by Kiev and Western general staffs turned out to be disastrous. So the not only the counteroffensive was disastrous, but the planning of the counteroffensive by Western general staffs, because the Western powers and the Western armies were training and guiding the Ukrainian forces before the counteroffensive started. And even some reports claim that some of the European and American governments, they pushed the Ukrainians to go into this counteroffensive, which I personally call it a meat grinder, and it led into disastrous results. Planners thought that once the first Russian defense lines were breached, the entire front would collapse. So the hope was that if the Ukrainians can navigate through or break through the first defense lines of the Russian forces who occupied the areas in the east of Donbass, the Donbass region, Novorossiya, what they call it, later to the south, for example, and in the Crimean area. I mean, the Russians had three defensive lines, and they thought that if they break through the first Russian defense lines, then the rest will be also breached. These fundamental preliminary phases were conducted without considering the moral forces of the enemy in defense. That is, the will of the Russian soldier to hold onto the terrain. So, according to this leaked document, what was missing in the thinking of the planners and the generals of the European generals who trained the Ukrainians to go into this, what they call a counteroffensive, is that the Russian soldiers were determined to hold onto their terrains and to defend their positions. They had on the moral side, on the spiritual side probably, or on the, not only militarily we were speaking, but also morally, for example, the morale was very high on the Russian side, and they were determined to repel this counteroffensive. The reports also highlight the inadequacy of the training of Ukrainian soldiers and officers due to a lack of officers and a significant number of veterans. So, unfortunately speaking, if you see the second paragraph, for example, the year two soldiers, those who joined to the war in the second year of the hostilities between Russia and Ukraine, they were often trained for no more than 3 weeks, and they were sent to the Russian fortification lines, and this was proven to be impregnable. So this is why I call it a meat grinder, because you cannot really send soldiers to the front line against one of the most fortified places in the world and one of the most mined places in the world, and against a superpower like the Russian forces without adequate training. And unfortunately, they didn't have that, and they had a lack of officers and significant number of veterans in order to conduct these operations against the Russian forces, and this led into disastrous consequences. Tens of thousands of them perished in this counter-offensive. without any air support, with desperate Western equipment that was less efficient than the old Soviet material. Unfortunately, this is ironic. Like the Western side thought that the old Soviet weapons are junk and they are inefficient, and if they give them the Western weapons, then this will be efficient. But this has proven to be less efficient because, in my opinion, the Ukrainian forces are built on a Soviet style, and they were part of the Soviet Union. Their technologies, their air defenses, their satellites, their forces, their generals, they were all trained on the Soviet era equipment, right? Or Russian recently. And now changing all the weaponry, it also requires that you change the systems, you change the technology, you change the satellites, you change the coding, and you change the training as well, right? So the Ukrainian troops had no hope of breaking through. Add to this the Russian super dominance in the field of electronic jamming. Again, on the technological side, Russia also had superiority. So not only air superiority and not only artillery superiority, but also electronic superiority over Ukraine. The reports also highlight that, contrary to Ukraine, the Russians have managed their reserve troops well to ensure operational endurance. According to this document, Moscow reinforces its units before they are completely worn out, mixes recruits with experienced troops, and ensures regular rest periods in the rear. So, unfortunately for Ukraine, that Ukrainians do not have this privilege to rest some of their forces or mix the recruits between the experienced ones and also the newcomers to the military, unlike in Russia, because the recruitment rate was much more higher than in Ukraine. And because of even statistically speaking, Russians are a bigger population than in Ukraine, and also the recruitment rate and the organization of the recruitment was much more efficient. And also we have to know that the Russian central state didn't collapse. The only reason why the Ukrainian central state didn't collapse is because of the Western support. When the West now removes its support from Ukraine collapsed tomorrow, after tomorrow, in a few days. So in Russia, they are planning, they are able to manage their recruits, and they are able to organize the recruitment and send them to the front lines, unlike in Ukraine, that is a failed state nowadays and lost its sovereignty permanently. And those who are managing the affairs in Ukraine are not the Ukrainians, are the Brits, are the French, are the Americans. And always had a coherent reserve force to manage unforeseen events. So there are also surprises that could come in any war, right? In any battles, there are surprise moments that you don't know what could come next. So in such situations, the Russians managed to have a coherent reserve force to manage unforeseen events. This is far from the widespread idea in the West of a Russian army sending its troops to the slaughter without counting. Of course, they always project it. This is the main issue and the main problem of Ukraine and not Russia. But they say that the Russians have they're disregarding their soldiers and they're sending them to their imminent death. So to date, the Ukrainian general staff doesn't have a critical mass of land forces capable of inter-arms maneuver at the corps level, capable of challenging their Russian counterparts to break through its defensive lines, concludes this confidential defense report, according to which the gravest error of analysis and judgment would be to continue to seek exclusively military solutions to stop the hostilities. And this is something not exclusive to the Ukrainian military generals and military staffers. It's also for the journalists, the so-called experts on Ukraine. They are all pushing for exclusive military solutions against Russia, and nobody is speaking about diplomacy. Nobody is speaking about the opportunities that arose in the past to strike a deal with Russia that could end these hostilities. So a French officer summarizes. He says, quote, "It's clear, given the forces present, that Ukraine cannot win this war militarily." On February 17, Kiev had to abandon the city of Avdiivka in the northern suburbs of Donetsk, which had until then been a fortified stronghold. It was both the heart and symbol of Ukrainian resistance in the Russian-speaking Donbass. The Ukrainian armed forces have tactically shown that they do not possess the human and material capabilities to hold the sector of the front that is subjected to the assailants' efforts, continues the document. The Ukrainian failure in Avdiivka shows that despite the emergency deployment of an quote elite brigade, the 3rd Azov Air Assault Brigade, Kiev is not capable of locally restoring a sector of the front that collapses, alerts this last report. So what the Russians will do with this tactical success remains to be seen. Will they continue in the current mode of nibbling and slowly shaking the entire front line, or will they seek to break through in depth? I suspect that it's going to be the first one. They're going to be slowly grabbing more land and not to seek a breakthrough, unless, of course, the Ukrainian forces completely collapse, and then we will be faced in a situation that probably the Europeans will send forces to Ukraine. So I think the first scenario is more plausible at the current moment, that the Russians will seek to slowly grab more land, especially in the south and southwest fronts in Ukraine. But if the Ukrainian forces collapse, then it will be a breakthrough. But the goal of the Russians is not to fastly, let's say, grab these territories, because then it requires a different military strategy, something that is called, for example, carpet bombing, like the Americans do and like the Israelis are doing nowadays in Gaza. So the terrain behind Avdiivka allows it, signals this. So this, what happened in Avdiivka, is it allows Russia to break through in depth into Ukraine, or more territories inside Ukraine. So let's see how this will develop in the near future. According to this analysis, after 2 years of war, Russian forces have thus shown their ability to develop operational endurance that allows them to wage a slow and long intensity war based on the continuous attrition of the Ukrainian army. So this is the summary of the article that I wanted to show you and present to you, and in order to see how the French is thinking in this regard. But what strikes me the most is that I'm not a military expert, right? I'm a political commentator, but I'm also a political monitor. I'm monitoring different conflicts in the world, one of which was the Syrian war. And in the Syrian war, I learned something about the defensive lines, about fortifications, about how both sides or multiple sides are mining territories for their enemies not to advance, and how you can break through these defensive lines, and the importance of the artillery power, the importance of the air force, and then the importance of the ground forces, right? So if your enemy has strong fortifications, you're not going to send your forces to wage a ground offensive against them before bombing and striking the fortifications of your enemy for several weeks by artillery power, by air force, or through other means, for example, and then the role of the ground forces come. But in the case of Ukraine, unfortunately speaking, the counteroffensive came without aerial superiority and without artillery superiority, and the Ukrainians couldn't even manage to sustain and continue in the bombing campaign, and I mean particularly the artillery campaign against the Russian forces, before waging this counteroffensive. And this is a suicidal mission against the Russian forces, right? And I analyzed this when I was on Russia Today 7 months ago, actually. This was in July 2023, when the counteroffensive was already clear that it's going to fail. And this is what I said on Russia Today. Unfortunately, when I speak about these cases, I get called Putinist, I get called this and that, but I don't really care anymore, because I'm trying to really present facts according to my understanding, and I'm also trying to save the lives of the Ukrainians, because I truly care about the Ukrainian lives and I don't want them to die in this meat grinder. Take a look what I said 7 months ago in this regard.
And let's go to Berlin. It's very interesting, over the last few news cycles, there seems to be some revealing information, if we can put it gently, is that the Wall Street Journal is talking about how the Biden administration knew that the counteroffensive that was so heralded by Zelensky and the Kiev regime, that they had no real air cover. And anyone knows, any military, I'm not a military person, but I know you don't go into a major conflict without any air cover to protect your troops and your tanks and whatnot here. This is an amazing admission on their part. It shows this is all about politics and ideology, not about security, and certainly not about Ukraine. Your thoughts?
Peter, some people may think I'm exaggerating, but my heart breaks when I see all these fallen people in Ukraine, where they are with tens of thousands of Ukrainians are dying in this meat grinder. And I'm not exaggerating when I call it a meat grinder. I'm a political journalist. I followed the Syrian war very closely, and I know what fortification means, and I know what mined territories means. And in Ukraine right now, this is the most mined territory in the world and the most secured fortification in the world. And Russia established these mine areas and the fortifications in a way that Ukraine will need a very strong artillery, and they have to bomb the fortifications for weeks at least. We're talking about probably 1 to 2 months to 3 months of bombing of Russia's fortifications and aerial cover before the attacking forces can advance in the Russian-held territories in Ukraine. We haven't seen any of this. They pushed the Ukrainian forces into this meat grinder, and now the American press acknowledges that at least 20% of the newly supplied hardware, advanced tanks that they provided to Ukraine are destroyed. And let's be honest, Peter, if the American press says 20%, you can multiply that to 2 or 3. That's like they're trying to do a narrative management, right? Because
look, a very good example of that.
So this is what I said like 7 months ago, right? And it's still truer today. And unfortunately, this is something that I really tried to also to explain to the Ukrainians, and many of them are very, 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 very anti-Russian and very like their sentiments are very anti-Russian and emotionally, and I understand that, but I want to preserve what is left from Ukraine, right? And if this continues, guys, I can assure you that it's going to end very, very badly for Ukraine. And it's only a matter of time now when Ukraine will raise the white flag. They're unable to win this war. Therefore, all this talk now about sending troops to Ukraine by the Europeans or by the Americans. I mean, there are already troops there undercover of the volunteers, and they are intelligence, they are CIA, they are MI6, they are trainers, they are people from the British side, they are installing the rockets or the missiles, the cruise missiles on their launchers, and then the Ukrainians are firing them. Probably there are also deaths among them, and they're hiding. But yesterday, if you remember, I was during the live streaming yesterday. I was a little bit emotional when I started to speak about this case, and I even cursed during the live streaming. And I said the situation in Ukraine is nothing but a meat grinder for Ukrainian men, with all these armchair journalists and military experts comfortably sitting behind their desks, demanding more war to quench their bloodlust and thirst for revenge. This is what I had to say yesterday. I get really emotional because for me, it breaks my heart to see all these tens of thousands of Ukrainian men are dying. And I'm going to show you some of the videos now, how they're treating the men of Ukraine when they are forcing them to go to conscription and go to serve the military. The delusion that any amount of aid will do anything but delay the inevitable is clearly laid out here for any objective observer to see. The outcome of this conflict is essentially already decided. It is now a matter of how many unfortunate Ukrainians have to die before the US tells Zelensky to end it. This is so fucking true that even the Pope told Ukrainians that they have to have the courage to raise the white flag and negotiate with Russia. Because the alternative is more humiliation and more hundreds of thousands more going to die in Ukraine. And there are no more men left. I don't know if you watched one of these videos the other day, the border security of Ukraine. They caught a van full of probably 50 Ukrainians trying to escape the country through smugglers. Probably the smugglers are in touch with the security and they got the money, they gave it to the border police, shared it, and then they detained them in the border and they were brutalizing them, and they are really they brutalized them, they hit them, they humiliated them, they subjugated them, and they then sent them to the front lines. In 2 weeks, they're sending them to the front lines in a meat grinder, killing Ukrainians, pure killing of Ukrainians. What's happening in Ukraine is just pure killing of Ukrainian men, while all these armchair so-called journalists and military experts sitting behind their desks and calling for more against Russia. Let's go, let's march toward Moscow, let's do it. You go. If you want to fight, you go. But you're a coward. You're not going to fight. You're sending the Ukrainians to their imminent death. And shame, this is a big shame. And bigger shame is for the Ukrainian government to allow this to happen for their own people. Hundreds of thousands are dying. For what reason? For ideological reasons? Because you're stubborn? Politics is the art of the possible, they say. What is possible and what is not possible? Is it possible for Ukraine to win against Russia? Is there anyone sane who think that they can win against Russia? And if Russia sees that they are going to lose this war, they're not going to use their nuclear weapons? No sane person could agree that Ukraine can win this war, but they are pushing more Ukrainians to their imminent death. Shame. Exactly. This is really shameful, guys, and it just breaks my heart. And this is a new video. I saw it today. Ukrainian woman cries as conscription officers push her man into their van. The last goodbye. Look how they are capturing men from the streets from everywhere and sending them to the meat grinder.
Спасите, блядь! Звоните полицию! Полицию звоните! Наберите полицию, люди! Не уезжайте!
So this is how things are in Ukraine, guys. And this is the video that I told you about, the shocking footage from the Ukrainian-Romanian border. Ukrainian border guards caught 34 men of conscription age attempting to flee from Ukraine. Each one of them paid 10,000 euros. So this is 340,000 in total. They paid it to the smugglers, you know. And I don't know if I should show this video to you or not. What's the matter with the YouTube community standards? So I will just try to probably show it a little bit here. Let's see. It doesn't have an audio anyways. So you see what's happening, right? This is how they're treating the men that they want to send to the front line. How do you think these men are going to fight in this way? And how do you think the morale of these fighting age men is going to be when they go to the front line, when they face well-armed and well-trained Russian forces? When I call it a meat grinder, do you think that I'm exaggerating? This is what is it. It's a meat grinder. They're sending these people to meat grinder. It's really, really sad. And that is why we have all this talk now about sending troops to Ukraine, and they're trying to sugarcoat it now, and they're trying to change. Of course, the Western governments and officials are so professional in changing definitions and changing what a word means. So you will see now how they are distorting the definition of sending troops to Ukraine and sugarcoating it with other means. So France finds Baltic allies in its spat with Germany over Ukraine troop deployment. France is building an alliance of countries open to potentially sending Western troops to Ukraine and is in the process of deepening its clash with a more cautious Berlin. French Foreign Minister Stéphane Séjourné was in Lithuania on Friday, where he met his Baltic and Ukrainian counterparts to buttress the idea that foreign troops could end up helping Ukraine in areas like demining. So, like, they are now selling us the sugarcoating sending troops to Ukraine under the guise of demining. So they think the Russians are stupid or clowns, right? Like, they don't understand that these troops are there for not only demining. So the foreign minister of France said it's not for Russia to tell us how we should help Ukraine in the coming months or years. Okay, let's see. The Baltic ministers praised France for, quote, thinking out of the box. I mean, they mean thinking in a suicidal manner. This is so stupid. If there is, I couldn't come up with a more stupid idea than sending French troops to Ukraine. It's like you're putting yourself in the forefront of a direct clash between Russia and France. It's like you're putting yourself in the forefront, and you're going to be damaged. You're going to be attacked by Russia. I mean, if French forces are deployed in Ukraine, what do you think is going to happen to the French forces? Like Russians are going to throw candies on them? It's crazy, man. The idea is just crazy. French President Emmanuel Macron last month raised the possibility that Western soldiers may have to be sent to Ukraine. Immediately afterward, most European countries, including Germany, the Czech Republic, and Poland, said they had no such plans. However, the three Baltic countries, the most exposed to any Russian attack, should Moscow succeed in its war against Ukraine, are much more open to the idea. I mean, this is from a mainstream media, so you get the point that they're telling us that after Ukraine, Russia is going to go to the Baltic countries, and this is complete, in my opinion, an illusion. Russia doesn't even want to go to Western Ukraine. They don't even want to occupy a hostile an area whose people are hostile towards Russia. It's very, very unsustainable militarily, economically, socially, and it will destroy Russia forever. If the Russians occupy any country outside of the territories that they are trying to occupy in Ukraine in order to turn it into landlocked, and what they call, of course, denazification of Ukraine. And this is mostly about turning Ukraine into landlocked and also depriving the value of Ukraine and blocking the accession of Ukraine into NATO. So if Russia doesn't abide by these rules and doesn't stay in Ukraine, they will lose big time. They know it, and they know it. So they will not do it. They don't have suicidal thoughts in this regard. Although Germany is by far the largest European military aid donor to Ukraine, it has come under fierce pressure for its reluctance to send Kiev long-range Taurus cruise missiles for fear of provoking Moscow. Kuleba, who is the foreign minister of Ukraine, he just made, of course, his mostly undiplomatic and stupid statements about this case. And he said, I'm personally fed up with the fear of escalation. Our problem is that we still have people who think of this war in terms of the fear of escalation. Of course they are afraid of escalation, you smart ass, because their countries are going to come under attack, and they're using you as a pawn in this war against Russia. Do you really think that you are a player in this conflict? You're not a player. They're playing with you against the Russians. So they're using you as a cannon fodder, as a pawn against Russia. The audacity of speaking in this tone and not having the understanding that they are nothing but a pawn in this conflict and the proxy of NATO, it's just beyond me. What does he mean when he says that he doesn't understand and he's personally fed up with the fear of escalation? Of course they're afraid of escalation. Of course there shouldn't be escalation in Europe. Why do you think it's a good idea to escalate the situation in Europe? Why do you think that a war between Russia and NATO is a good idea? Why do you think that the deaths and the killing of millions of people, if such a war happens, and God forbid it would never happen, because millions of people could die in Europe and in Russia. And who wants that, right? Kuleba said, what kind of escalation are you afraid of? What else has to happen to Ukraine for you to understand that this fear is useless? What do you expect Putin to do? Well, I sent tanks, but I didn't send the missiles or troops. So maybe you will be nicer to me than to the others. That's not how Putin thinks. That's not how he treats Europe. This is so stupid. I cannot even call anything else than stupid. This Kuleba, and he's very disrespectful. Even he was disrespectful to the foreign minister of Germany as well when they spoke about the Taurus missiles and what happened about the conversation in Germany about the Taurus missiles. He thinks that he's in a position that he can dictate any policy on Europe. You're just a pawn, brother. They decide for you. You don't decide for them. However, the Polish foreign minister, if you remember when he tweeted, thank you, the United States, when the bombing of the Nord Stream pipelines happened, I mean, this guy sometimes comes and says, drop some facts. And he says the troops of NATO countries are already in Ukraine. And then thanks to and then he thanked these countries. Swiroski is married to a rabid neocon writer, Anne Applebaum. These lunatics will start World War III if given the chance. This is David Sachs. He said this. I just want to fix this screen so that we see what he said.
Żołnierze krajów NATO już są na Ukrainie i chciałbym serdecznie podziękować ambasadorom tych krajów, które takie ryzyko podjęły. One same wiedzą najlepiej, które to są.
Bo pan nie powie przecież.
Bo ja w odróżnieniu od niektórych polityków europejskich tego nie będę mówił.
So this is the situation now, guys. There are troops, of course, as I told you, and this recent leak, the audio leak of German officers when they were speaking about the situation in Ukraine and sending the Taurus missiles. I mean, they spoke clearly about the presence of British troops in Ukraine, that they're helping in the installing the cruise missiles on the launchers. And they were thinking of asking the Brits if they give the Taurus missiles to Ukraine, that the Brits would help them in the installation and the firing of these missiles. So, of course, there are British Secret Service there. American Secret Service, and there are many American soldiers as well under the guise of the volunteers, and also from other countries, right? So unfortunately, they unofficially they are there. So, but officially, if they come and they send troops and brigades, I think that's going to be the red line that will start a huge escalation in this conflict, and I hope it would never happen. I pray for that, really. I pray for that, because the alternative is for the alternative for not joeing and talking. It's this, because in such scenarios, what happens, guys, is that one side does something, the other side considers it an escalation, so the other side escalates a little bit, and they start like a little by little of movements of escalatory moves. Until it ends up into an all-out war. And I think Ukraine has an invested interest in an all-out war because they lost the war already. And they need the NATO troops or the European troops or American troops to save their asses. And this is similar to the situation in Israel. Israeli side wants to escalate in Lebanon against Hezbollah so that it drags the Americans into this bloody conflict, because the Israelis up until this moment couldn't manage to achieve their declared goals in the Gaza Strip, right? So if you're losing such a war, I'm not saying Israelis are losing the war, but they're not able to succeed to achieve these goals. Escalatory steps make sense from the thinking and the mentality of Netanyahu to bring the United States into this conflict and urge them to send boots underground and forces and air force, right? Similarly in Ukraine, they already lost the war. So what is going to save them now is only NATO troops. But the NATO troops mean a huge escalation from Russia. So pray for this not to happen, guys. And people like myself are called Putinists for saying this obvious, right? And I already mentioned this multiple times. And one of the people who is also called a Putinist is Professor John Mearsheimer, and he was on this guy's show, Piers Morgan, and he was asked about this and him being accused of being a Putinist, etc., etc. And I really liked his answer, because this is what I also feel about it when I'm being called by Putinist, Assadist, Kremlin talking point, etc., etc. Because if you can't counter my arguments with legit arguments or even arguments, then you just have nothing but to smear me and resort into personal smearing. Take a look.
To seem a firm conviction that we should take Vladimir Putin at his word. You've been criticized for this. You have a lot of supporters. You're extremely eminent in your field. I don't remotely suggest otherwise. But you've had people like the journalist and Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Anne Applebaum, who's accused you of being Putin's useful idiot, her quote, not mine. I mean, how do you respond to people that see you like that?
As I often say, when I was a little boy, my mother taught me, when you can't beat people with facts and logic, what you do is you smear them. You engage in name calling. And Anne Applebaum is famous for that. She is unable to beat me with facts and logic, so she calls me Putin's puppet. I don't take these arguments seriously. The question is, what do the facts say? And if you look at the facts, it's quite clear that Putin was not bent on conquering all of Ukraine. I would point out to you, Piers, that shortly after the war started, as you know, it started in February of 2022, and almost exactly 2 years ago, shortly after the war started, Putin and the Ukrainians were negotiating a deal to end the war. And that deal did not include Putin conquering all of Ukraine. All Putin wanted to do is clear from the historical record, is make sure that you got a neutral Ukraine, which meant that Ukraine would not be part of NATO. What happened immediately after the war started in Istanbul is clear evidence, in my opinion, that Putin was not bent on conquering all of Ukraine. He just wanted to make sure it did not become part of the Western alliance.
Guys, I swear to God, I have not watched this interview before making my mind about what's happening in Ukraine. And it's not, believe me, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand what's happening in Ukraine. And the facts are rolled there. The facts are there. The documents are there. And the geography, you can put it in front of you, the geopolitics, so you understand what's happening, and also a little bit of history. It's clear what's happening there, right? And as I told you guys, on Thursday, Professor Jamal Wakim is coming to the show. I'm very excited about that. He's one of the people that I learned from him about the Ukrainian war. But if you just remember, this was in February 25th, 2022. And I interviewed him on Syriana Analysis. I think this was the last time I interviewed him on Syriana Analysis, because then he got really busy. He had his own show, and then he's teaching in the university. And now this Thursday he has time. He wants to come back to Syriana Analysis. And this is the old setup of Syriana Analysis. I'm going to show you how it looked like if you're a new subscriber to Syriana Analysis. I used to use the mobile here, the camera and the old microphone and the old setup, everything. So Dr. Jamal Wakim, Russia without Ukraine, he said, will be stripped of its Eurasian character and become an Asian power. The goal is not only to isolate Russia, but to keep Europe under US control. This is what he said in this regard. I'm going to let you watch it completely like this.
It's my right to defend myself, but it's not my right to take a gun and point it at others and say it's in self-defense. We know how pivotal Ukraine is for the Russian defense. And in Brzezinski's book, he says that Russia without Ukraine will be stripped of its Eurasian character and become an Asian power. And that's what they are trying to do, the United States, to draw a wedge between Russia and Europe in order not only to, let's say, isolate Russia, but also to have a better grab of Europe and keep it under US control. This is what the US geopolitical thinkers say, to keep Europe under control and at bay in order for Europe not to play an independent role. And we see that the first side effect of the war today was increase in the prices of gas, consumed gas in Europe, also a drop in the value of the euro. And all American actions undertaken in the past 3 decades, they were not only harmful to the security of Russia, but they were also harmful to the interests of Europe, and mainly to the interests of Germany, that the United States is trying to strip it from the possibility of playing an independent role at the international scene.
So this was Professor Jamal Wakim on Syriana Analysis, the old version of Syriana Analysis, the old equipment and everything of Syriana Analysis. I truly think it looks really better now with the camera, with the microphone, with the background and everything. And my wife also played a very good role in setting up the background and the lighting and everything. Now, even the lighting over my hair, it's her work, and I'm really grateful for that. Actually, I'm also grateful for all the support you give to this channel in order to enable me, and also we continue here. It's a one-man show, but I do lots of efforts really to prepare these live streamings, and I'm really happy to communicate with you as well in the comments, and seeing all the afterwards when I'm posting the video, for example, when the live is over and I see people disagreeing with me. I like that, really. And I will take some of the disagreements, as I told you about the Estonian case, and I'm going to ask these questions or the disagreements, tell it to Nina Byzantina tomorrow, Wednesday at 5 p.m. Central European Time, and let's see what she has to say in this regard. But before that, I want to just give a credit to Arnaud. Arnaud was the person who summarized this article that I quoted today at the beginning and created the slides, and he posted the English translation, as you can see here, and this is the link here. Arnaud Bertrand, he's a very good, actually, also analyst on China and geopolitical affairs, and I follow him on Twitter and X to see what's happening around the world and also make sense of what's happening around the world. That's very important. Now, before ending this live streaming, guys, I just want to make a point about also Palestine, Gaza. I think this is very, very important. Actually, I realized recently, like people like, for example, you have this guy called Rabbi Shmuley, and you have Ben Shapiro, and we have other personalities who say they are proud Jewish people or proud Zionist people, and they make very provocative statements on social media platforms in a way that there is no person who would like that statements unless you are very, very arch pro-Zionist supporter, then you would like that. But the vast majority of the people, they would feel like they're going to puke when they read that. They feel pain in the stomach when they read what they're writing. For example, recently, Rabbi Shmuley, he published an article in an Israeli press, and he said the title goes like, Jews must be feared rather than loved. And if you follow his words and his statements on Twitter, you feel like this guy is just purposely, deliberately provoking the people, and this provocation is only leading into some simple people and real anti-Semites to say, look, I told you all Jews are like this or low Jews like that. You know, these generalizations about the Jewish people and then equating between the Zionists and the Jewish people. It's a trappy path, but they're doing it on purpose, in my opinion. And I posted this and I said, Rabbi Shmuley's role is to intentionally create a negative perception of Jews, aiming to incite real anti-Semites to carry out acts of violence against the Jewish communities worldwide. He is fully aware of the consequences of his words. These extremists need anti-Jewish sentiments to rationalize their actions in Palestine. And when I posted this today, I was reading again on X, I saw that Bassem Youssef, the famous Egyptian comedian, he posted this today, and he said, I apologize for my tech ignorance in advance, but did you notice how the pro-Israeli tweets are so brazen and mean and in your face evil? How they are all echoing the same lies and talking points, knowing they have been refuted many times. They don't care for the validation or the approval. They do this on purpose so they have more pissed off interactions. Exactly. So they move up in the feed. Then suddenly all your timeline is composed of tweets echoing their propaganda, your thoughts. And I told him this, this is my exact opinion as well. Some of the debunked lies are repeated by professional pro-Israel activists for a few reasons. By Ben Shapiro, for example, and also by Shmuley and many, many others, by the way. They are paid to peddle these debunked lies in a provocative way. And why? For two reasons. There are many reasons, but among them, one, to keep the pro-Israel audience alarmed, traumatized, and accepting of the actions of Tel Aviv in Gaza and beyond, and two, to generate hatred among the anti-occupation audience and try to persuade the simple people into generalizations against the Jewish people in order to capitalize on them and try to rationalize the Israeli barbarity in Gaza. This is just, I wanted to make this point, guys, because it's very important for not to fall into these narratives and not to fall into these attempts to rationalize what they're doing in the Gaza Strip. Because if they steer the sentiments of anti-Jewish sentiments around the world, and if there is any attack against any Jewish community in anywhere around the world, they will capitalize on it. And they thrive on it. I'm sure about that. And I'm sure also any sort of persecution or violence against Jewish people helps the Zionists in Israel and for what they're doing. Try to justify it, and also to try to tell to the people that the only place that you're safe to come to Israel. And ironically, you see, it's not ironic. I mean, you see all these, what they call themselves right-wingers in the United States, these Christian Zionists, they're all supporting what Israel is doing there. While they are also anti-Semites, many of them are anti-Semites. They hate the Jewish people, but they want them to go to Palestine, you know? So they support Israel because the idea of Israel means that the Jewish people in their countries will eventually migrate and go to Palestine, right? Or what they call it now, Israel, or the Israeli territories, that they're trying to occupy all of Palestine now. So for the right-wingers, it makes sense. Not all of them. I'm not saying all right-wingers. I'm just saying these Christian Zionists who call themselves right-wingers, it makes sense for them to support Israel because they are anti-Semites and they don't want to see Jewish people in their country, so they want to send them to Israel. So I think this is a good alliance between the anti-Semitic people in the West, the real anti-Semitic people, by the way, and there are many, and this is not our product in the Middle East, this is the product in Europe. Sorry, guys, if you're watching me from Europe or from the United States, but this is not our product. This is the product of Europe and also exported later to the United States. This is not our product in the Middle East. We're not anti-Semites. We are anti-occupation. And we do not do this struggle against Israel because they are Jewish. We do it because they're occupying our lands, including our land in Syria, the Golan Heights. So I think that's enough reasons for me also to be in a position opposing and objecting the Israeli actions in the Middle East. So guys, thank you so much for watching this live streaming. I appreciate you all, and I apologize that I started this live streaming today 2 hours late. As I told you, I had to make some papers here in Germany. And tomorrow and Wednesday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time, Nina Pizantina is coming. We're going to discuss historical aspects of World War II and draw parallels with what's happening in Ukraine. And on Thursday, Jamal Wakim is coming to the show again, Professor Jamal Wakim at 5 p.m. Central European Time, and also 11 a.m. American Time. By the way, the book of John Mearsheimer, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, if you want to purchase it, guys, it's a brilliant book to understand the influence of the Zionist lobby over the U.S. foreign policy. You can purchase the book in the United States, from the United States or from Germany. All the links are in the description below. Until then, we'll see you tomorrow, guys, 5 p.m. Central European Times. Peace be upon you and upon your families. Salam.